Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on when you're seeing this. This is the fourth podcast from my book, taken from my yet to be published book, As in the Days of Noah. And this podcast is actually the first in a series of probably three, could be four podcasts talking about what it was like in the days of Noah before the flood and how what God saw then, what he may be seeing in the current era. So let's start with a scripture from Matthew. This is Matthew 24, verses 37 and 39. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. So Noah and his sons built the ark according to the very specific plans that were given to them by God. If we take a look at the verse in Genesis 6:13 through 16, and God said unto Noah, The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. And this is the fashion which thou shalt make it of. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. A window shall thou make to the ark, and in a cubit shalt thou finish it above, and the door of the ark shall then set in the side thereof with lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it. So the ark was the biggest ship built at that time. In fact, it would be the largest sailing vessel constructed by man until the 1800s. We don't know exactly where Noah lived at the time that he and his sons were building this ark. But given the size of the ark, even if he had beachfront property, there would be mockers. Can you just imagine the reaction of those around him? Fool, crazy, he needs to be locked away. I can almost hear that derision, the laughter, and the mockery. In that, at least, there's a strong correlation between then and now, with all those mocking us who believe in and have our put our faith in Jesus Christ. We read in the book of Genesis the story of God creating the heavens and the earth and breathing his life into the first man, Adam. We all know that story. Adam and Eve were tempted by the serpent, Satan, and disobeyed God and ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They were then cast out of the Garden of Eden. But they turned back to God, right? Yes, they were human with all the weakness and frailties that goes along with that, but they realized their wrongs and took steps to correct them, right? Well, sadly, no. In fact, it wasn't long before God regretted even creating humans, as we had fallen so far short of the mark. If we take a look at Genesis 6:6, and it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. The first generation of humans born from humans show that continued rebellion against God. Cain, the son of Adam and Eve, killed his brother Abel in a fit of jealousy. That can be seen in Genesis 4:8. There are 10 generations between Adam and Noah, and just over 1600 years, closer to 1650. In that time, God saw havoc created by man on earth and grieved. Take a look at Genesis 6, verse 5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Continually. I can you even imagine that? Well, we're going to take a look at that. Let's talk a little bit about that history. We don't know the exact date of creation. We do, however, have an accurate timeline from Adam to Noah with Genesis chapters 5 and 6, giving us all the ages of the father at the time of the son's birth. For example, Noah was 130 when Seth was born, as well as how long each of Noah's forefathers lived, what their lifespan was. From these respective ages, we can create an estimated, and a key word here is estimated, timeline from Adam to Noah and to the flood. We know about those 10 generations. We know about the 1656 years from Adam to the flood. The only predecessor of Noah that was alive to see him build the ark was his grandfather, Methuselah, who died in the year of the flood. Noah's father, Lamech, died a few years before the flood, so he did see some of the building, but he didn't see the completion. Um, we know that Noah was 600 years old when God told him to build the flood, and we know he lived 350 years after the flood. So, if we take a look at that timeline, this gets a little interesting. So, ask you to bear with me here. If we take a look at that timeline, of course, we see Adam, and I'm using an estimating date of 4000 BC. So we have Seth and Enos, we have Canaan, and who's the next one? Mahalalel, and then Jared, and then Enoch, and then we have Methuselah, Noah's grandfather, and then we have Lamech, Noah's father, and then we have Noah. The flood happened approximately 2340, 2350 BC. So this is a whole timeline. If we take a look at that from the time of Adam. Now, again, I'm going to stress here, I'm using the date of 4000 BC as the beginning because we don't actually know the true beginning of that time. And there are several theories out there, but until we can ask God, we don't really know. In 1642, John Lightfoot, after an analysis of the Bible genealogies, published that the earth was created on September 17th, 3928 BC. James Ussher, who lived from 1581 to 1656, stated that it was in October of 4004 BC. So we really don't know. There are some other dates out there as well. But for this timeline, and just to keep it simple, I've used 4000 BC as the start date with an E. You see all the little E's underneath that scale at the bottom for an estimate, because this is all truly estimated. But it does give us an idea. So if we look at that timeline and see who all was living on the earth or what the timeline was from Adam to Noah, you have to wonder, what is it that God saw that grieved him so much at that time that he destroyed the creation that he had just built? Um, and what is it that he is seeing today that would equally grieve him? Well, the Bible doesn't give us really a breakdown of the specific offenses that God saw that caused him to instruct Noah to build the ark because he was going to flood the earth. But just a bit of research gives us part of the answer. In fact, everything that we know about the flood from the Bible is in 3 chapters in Genesis, chapters 6, 7, and 8. So it's a quick read. Sin is perhaps the oversimplified answer. God saw mankind living continually in sin. with all his thoughts and imaginations continually dwelling on evil, and that is why he brought the flood. Now, is that what God sees when he looks at his creation today? Well, let's take a closer look at what we do know about the days before the flood. Number one, it was a time of city building. Genesis 4, verses 16 through 17. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden. If you remember, Cain was kicked out. He was chased away because of his murder of his brother. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch, and he builded a city. This is the first mention of anyone building a city in the Bible. But I kind of doubt city building was the cause of God's grief, though it may have been a contributor. The mention of cities throughout the Bible are not usually very flattering statements. Even Jerusalem, the holy city of Jerusalem, is called Sodom in Egypt in Revelation chapter 11, verse 8. We don't have any images or drawings of these great cities because they were all destroyed, or know much about the architecture from the antediluvian period. But in 2015, some very interesting satellite images of structures in the Sahara Desert were discovered. No one can say for certain that these were antediluvian or pre-flood structures, or perhaps they were ancient Egyptian pyramids. We don't know. And until those can be more closely evaluated, we won't know. Um, uh, but if you'd like to take a look at those images, I don't have them here. I didn't copy them for copyright images. But if you go to ancientpages.com and look for the Sahara structures, you'll be able to see those. I'll put that link up here, and you can take a look at it real quick if you want to write that down. It's actually a very interesting story, interesting article. Now, number two, it was an age of metallurgy. Genesis 4:22, and Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. So again, I'm not convinced that just the formation of metals or the discovery of metalwork was the cause of God's grief over the world at that time. But it may have been another one of those contributing factors. After all, we will see in just a minute that the earth was filled with violence, and violence was rampant in those days. And of course, a lot more damage can be done with weapons of metal than wood and stone. This next one I really like. It was an age dominated by music. Genesis 4:21. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. So he was the father of musical instruments. And mankind, perhaps for the first time, came under the influence of music. These musical instruments became all the rage and sparked an increased popularity for great feasts and celebrations, even wedding extravaganzas. Um, have you watched any music videos recently? Even churches today are getting into the musical extravaganza scene with special lighting effects and elaborate sound systems and shows that would challenge a Las Vegas show. But on the other hand, we also have David singing psalms unto the Lord and playing his harp. So I don't know that it was music that was the source of the problem, at least not by itself. As a child of the 50s and 60s, I can certainly attest to the fact that music can have a tremendous impact on a generation. Number four, what God saw during this period of time, idol worship. This is a tricky one. We're going to be coming back to this one. But perhaps this is what grieved God the most. The humans that he had made in his own image had turned away from him. They were sacrificing to man-made gods and worshiping graven images. Now, as a side note, the study of this idol worship is actually quite interesting. But research will show that the idol worship actually started out as something quite individualistic, where each home had their own statue or graven image that they worshiped, and usually those graven images or those statues were of to represent their own ancestors, because they believed that their ancestors became gods, and that when they died, they in turn would also become gods. This is, of course, a lie from Satan. The ritualistic and the organized idol worship that we see later on, post flood, has not developed yet, that as far as we know. And we know a good bit of that organized worship with child sacrifices and all kinds of horrible things. A lot of that came out of Babylon after the flood. So, we don't really know exactly what that idol worship was during that period of time. We know a little bit about it. We know it was not the organized idol worship, or we suspect that it was not the organized idol worship that followed the flood and came mostly out of Babylon. But we do know that they were turning away from God. And instead of worshiping God, their creator, they were actually worshiping their own ancestors and believed that those ancestors became gods. Now, if we take a look at Romans chapter 1, verses 20 to 23, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but he became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. So they really lost focus here, and they had turned away from God. A little cautionary note here. Remember the story of Cain and Abel. Abel was a righteous man, Cain not so much. He was cast out from Eden. Uh, I'm sorry, he was cast out from where Adam and Eve dwelt and went to live in the land of Nod. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. Adam and Eve were blessed with another child, Seth, who was also a righteous man. And it is from Seth that the image depicted, that timeline that we showed you a little earlier, is those people descended. Okay, now we're going to talk about something a little bit of controversy, and it's something that we're going to be covering more fully in a future podcast. We're going to talk about the fallen ones. Let's talk about that population explosion. Not only were the women procreating, but with these long lifespans, multiple generations were present at the same time. In the current era, we may see 3 or 4 generations alive at the same time. rare occasion, a fifth generation. But there is at least one point on that timeline that I showed you earlier, circa 3100 BC, where there were 9 generations alive all at the same time. And that's just one family line. I bet family reunions could get quite crowded and quite interesting. Genesis 6, verse 1 and 2. And it came to pass, when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they choose. So not only were the women procreating with the men, but the Bible tells us, and it came to pass, what we just read, the verse that we just read. So, who or what are these sons of God? Josephus, AD 37 to circa 100 AD, in his Antiquities of the Jews, states that these were fallen angels, and writes, "For many angels of God coupled with women, and begat sons that proved unjust, and despisers of all that was good, on account of the confidence they had in their own strength." For the tradition is that these men did what resembled the acts of those whom the Grecians called giants. Now that's from Josephus. The Sethite theory, which came about in the 1500s, says that these sons of gods were actually the sons of Seth, who married into the Canaanite women, Cain's lineage, resulting in humans of unusual strength and power. This theory came about because the church was being heavily criticized for saying that angels, even fallen angels, had sinned and had sexual relationship with a woman. Josephus' theory that these were fallen angels seems to be further supported later in the Old Testament. In Job, we see a group of sons of God coming before the Lord. Included in this group was Satan himself. Let's take a look at that. Job 1:6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The result of this intermingling of the blood of the sons of God and human women were what in the original Hebrew were called Nephilim, which sometimes was translated as giants. Whatever you want to call them, the consensus is that they were not righteous in the eyes of God. In the Hebrew, the word Nephilim, or the root word of Nephilim, Nephal, means to fall or lie. So the Nephilim were the fallen ones. They were also no longer human, made in the image of God. They were part human and part sons of God. If Josephus is correct and the translation from Hebrew is correct, these beings no longer carried only the DNA of human beings. This will become important to remember in one of these later podcasts in this series as we take a look at what's happening in the current era. So let's hold on to that thought. In conclusion, in the time before the flood, there was much violence among the people. Humans were breeding and procreating with non humans, resulting in these half humans or Nephilim, and they had turned away from God and were worshiping man made idols. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, and he told Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, to build the ark. God saved the righteous man from his wrath, as he did again with Moses later, an opening of the Red Sea, and will again in the end times. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Let me ask you, if the Lord came today, would you find grace in his eyes? Next week, we're going to explore more about that idol worship we talked about earlier and see how that correlates in current times. So until then, be blessed, keep your eyes on the skies, and good night.